So, we may start with Mrs. Dr. Maria Mitzi Anagnostou, who is going to talk about the social and financial position of women in ancient Sparta. I really want to thank the members of the organizing committee and especially Mrs. Kanelopoulou for giving me the honor to participate in this conference. I want to present you the human position in ancient Sparta and in the Spartan ethos. Teacher of ancient history, I wanted to devote my presentation and my paper in Nikos Virgalias. The issue of Spartan particularity, that is, the debate surrounding the question of whether Sparta was a deviation in the map of the city-states of Greek antiquity, is clearly not new, and has not been the object of study only in modern historical research. As is well known, the discourse surrounding the image of Sparta dates back to antiquity, and in particular to the way in which the ancients themselves perceived and projected the city of Lycurgus. Although the subject of the scholarly debate on Sparta itself constitutes a separate subject of research, which is indeed of great interest, the aim of this paper is not to answer the question of whether ancient Sparta was a different city, since every city-state in its pursuit of autonomy pursued diversity, but to attempt to explain the content of Spartan diversity in economic and political terms. The focus on the exploration of the status of women is going to help us significantly in understanding the subject, since, as Redfield has aptly stated, the status of women, the position of women in Sparta, is the interpretive key to understanding the whole Spartan system. Starting from the assumption that the position of women in ancient Sparta was different from that of women in other Greek cities, we are called upon to investigate, firstly, what this difference consists of, and secondly, where it is due to, exploring in particular here the role of the female homia in the Spartan ethos. Regarding the first question, the sources available to us speak of a peculiar image of the Spartan woman for Greek standards, who seems to have enjoyed a number of rights and increased freedoms. This differentiation can be traced back to two main points. Firstly, the fact that women in ancient Sparta owned property. She was the owner of land which she inherited from her parents and bequeathed to her children, and the fact that she participated in the public education system established by the city. This image of the Spartan woman, who on the one hand had the right to a clergyman's lot and on the other hand was active outside the boundaries of the home, in the context of Spartan education, appeared as particularly provocative in the eyes of the other Greeks. More specifically, Aristotle, referring to Sparta in the 4th century before Christ, where the city was suffering from the phenomenon of oliganthropy, which means the reduction in the number of Spartans who had political rights and constituted the political board of peers, he criticized the practice of accumulating land in the hands of a few, especially women, who in his time collected 2 out of 5 of the land lots. This phenomenon, according to Aristotle, is due to the increase in the number of bailiffs in the habit of giving large dowries. The Athenian pictures, however, the case of which the philosopher has in mind when referring to Sparta, is the daughter to whom the family lot passes, whether no male heirs, but she herself has no right to inheritance and property. For this reason, and in order for the lot to remain within the house, she was obliged to inherit the property and marry her nearest male relative. In contrast, in Sparta, the patrouchos was the sole heir to the family property. However, in the case where Spartan daughter was not a patrouchos, she participated in the distribution of the family lot as provided for under Spartan inheritance law. The fact that the size of the land that was to be given to her, that a Spartan woman came from, was determined according to the economic level and shows us that a great way of the domestic wealth was owned by women. On the other hand, Xenophon and later Plutarchus, referring to the education received by Spartan daughters, mention the participation of Spartan women in running and wrestling. In their attempt to explain the causes of this strangeness, the two ancient writers contributed to the Spartan myth, the main characteristics of which are the military character of the city, the Spartans' steady and hard-working way of life, and the subordination of private life to public life. Thus, on the one hand, Xenophon is quick to explain to his Athenian contemporaries that the different education of Spartan women is due to the warlike orientation of the city, and in this case is linked to the need to achieve the greatest duty of women of the peer class, to bear healthy and strong children who will serve in the ranks of the army. Plutarch later will add that the purpose of the training of women in Sparta was connected with the assurance of the qualitative improvement of the offspring, for example, the so-called eugenics, as well as with the strengthening and scleragogy of women, who could more easily endure the odds of childbirth. At this point, it should be noted that the phenomenon of public sports for girls is a fact for Sparta, as confirmed by archaeological evidence, but is not an exclusively Spartan custom, as similar cases are assessed in other regions of Greece as well, as in Chios, in the sanctuary of Verona, and in the gymnasium of Olympia. However, the political content and significance of this practice in the case of Sparta is related to a characteristic that is exclusive to the Spartan society. It concerns the only institutionalized system of public education in Greek antiquity, the so-called Spartan education, which was compulsory and uniform for all Spartan children, boys and girls, in order to acquire political status. To avoid misunderstandings, we should explain here that by the term political status, we mean the recognition on the part of the city of the inclusion of a person in the political body of Spartans, the so-called omi. In the Spartan city, the acquisition of political status was primarily connected with the recognition of the right of inheritance to the descendants of the Spartans. In other words, the granting of a land lot, which began as a process from within the Spartan family with the formal recognition of the right to a land lot to those children, boys or girls, whom the head of the house had first and foremost recognized as his genuine descendants and legal heirs, implied the potential, from the city's point of view, granting of the Spartan or Spartans political status. From this point onwards, the process of politicization for those children who joined the Spartan ethos by right of inheritance as equals was completed through the successful completion of education, which for this reason was compulsory addressed to both sexes. It should be clarified, however, that the acquisition of political rights, for example participation in the election to public office, concerned only the male population of the omi. In this case, too, it should be pointed out that the acquisition, and even more so the maintenance of political rights in Sparta, was strongly connected to the economic status and financial status of the Spartan, since an inability to meet their financial obligation as a citizen, maintenance of equipment for participation in the military war operations, participation in Syssitia, financing the education of his children, entailed the loss of political rights. The above data, in relation to the testimonies of Aristotle, Xenophon, and Plutarchus, compose the picture of an extremely privileged economy and political position of women in Sparta. And we come at this point to the second question that we posed before: where did this come from? Taking into consideration the wealth in Sparta was the main criterion on which depend not only the position of its Spartan as a citizen among the body of omi, but much more the degree of their participation in the political life of the city, we can now understand why the position of women in Sparta differed from that of women in other Greek cities. It should first be mentioned that the differentiation of the position of the Spartan woman was mainly presented through the Athenian literature of the 5th and 4th centuries as an antinomy to the mainly Athenian model. Thereby, for example, in Andromache of Euripides, the poet comments negatively on the position of women in Spartan society by showing Hermione, daughter of Menelaus, king of Sparta, proudly displaying her wealth, stressing that the socio-economical position due to her father's rich wedding gifts allows her to express herself freely. Free expression here is linked to the opportunity that wealthy Spartan women seem to have acquired to exercise political influence, a right that derived from their high economic status. The strengthening of political power as a consequence of wealth was hinted at, as we have seen, mainly by Aristotle, referring to the increase in the number of partisans during his reign and the great dowries that Spartans gave to their daughters. As a result, the corresponding strengthening of the influence of women within the house can be shown, a fact which, according to the philosopher, led during the period of Spartan hegemony to the phenomenon of gynecocracy, or else in Greek gynekokratia. Considering that at the time Aristotle was writing the Law of Opitadeia, which already allowed the free disposal of the Spartan clergy, a fact that favored large land ownership. The importance of marrying a patriarch or possibly a wealthy Spartan woman became of substantial interest. Consequently, Aristotle, referring to the oligarchic character of aristocratic societies such as the Spartan one, highlights that the concentration of wealth and, moreover, of power in the hands of a few means that the greatest concern of the nobles is to secure the increase in political power that wealth entails by entering into marriages that will bring the desired economic or political reinforcement. Marriage, in this case, to rich and prominent Spartan women, reflects a way of behaving among the members of Spartan society who were competing in the acquisition of wealth and the political privileges it brings. In this case, the large dowries which Spartans used to give to their daughters reflect the competitive spirit among Omi, both on the part of the families who gave their daughter in marriage and on the part of those families who competed with each other, as they did in the context of Homer Icos as well, to claim the richest bride. The dowry in the given case is the measurable factor, as Hodgkinson points out, which increases the competitiveness of the Icos, which through marriage, or more precisely through the practice of homogamy, achieves further economic and political consolidation. Therefore, we understand that the different position of women in Sparta is a function of their economic and political role within the Spartan ecos. Attempting here to a brief clarification of the term, we should first clarify that in Sparta, as in any other city, family, from an anthropological point of view, the structural cell of the society. The notable difference in the case of Sparta lies in the fact that the Spartan family was able to expand its basis by integrating under certain conditions individuals from different social classes with different aspirations and different positions. To this numerous and socially heterogeneous group of individuals that we refer, using the term Spartan ecos with regard to the human resources it includes. At the same time, however, the house is identified with the landed property. The central role of the female omia in the Spartan ecos is therefore perceived by the fact that, on the one hand, it contributes financially to the enlargement of the family property on the basis of its hereditary rights, while at the same time transferring to its descendants, apart from the share of land to which it is entitled, the political status deriving from it, and on the other hand, it contributes to the safety and strengthening of the ecos through the practices applied depending on the interest pursued. The case of the so-called boring is also typical. Boring of the wife mentioned by Xenophon, who speaks of the will of woman to possess dual houses, regardless of the apologetic tone of the writer, who is trying to explain to his Athenian contemporaries the strange practices of the Spartans. In the case of the dual ecos, the role of the woman in the Spartan house is more clearly evident. Depending on the objective pursuit concerning the acquisition of a descendant with or without right of inheritance, the head of the house could either lend his wife to another Spartan or borrow the wife of another Spartan in the context of an agreement between them concerning which of them would take on the new membership of his Ikos and under what status. We should also mention here the possibility that the Spartans' economic political position allowed for the acquisition of offspring through the so-called mixed marriages, for example, which means the possible union of a woman of the same sex with a man from a different social class. In such a case, the integration of the offspring in the house with the prospect of joining the body politic was carried out on the part of the mother, who was able to finance the participation of the illegitimate child in education, alongside her legitimate offsprings. This fact reflects the dynamic of the Spartan ethos in terms of the possibilities of social mobility that could allow its members, each of whom could, depending on the family bonds, follow a different path of development. Either it has to do with their political status inside the Spartan ethos and in the Spartan city as well. In the case of the dual ethos described by Xenophon, depicting in fact the Spartan house in progress, woman is described, as Redfield observes, as the means of transfer of wealth and political power from one ethos to another, and thus the indicator of the level of wealth and political status in the competitive relations that developed between them. This means that the role of the female Omia in the Spartan ethos was not only economic but mainly political, which means that it influenced the Spartan ethos regarding the participation of the members of Spartan ethos in the political way of life and in strengthening the Spartan ethos. The cases of Agistrata and Archidamia are mentioned as typical examples. Mother and grandmother of Aegis respectively, who were considered the richest women in Sparta in the 3rd century before Christ, and who created interactive family bonds among Spartan families. To cut a long story short, the privileged position of women in ancient Sparta consisted, as we have seen, in the fact that the Spartan woman was entitled to inherit the family declared inheritance. This economic position implied the need on the part of the city for the political way of life and the female Omias through the participation in education. In a city where property held a dominant position for the social and political status of individuals, this implies that both the way the lot was inherited and the connection of descendants to the family property base, as well as the connection of the human Omia to this base, are interpreted in relation to the economic political status of the Spartan ethos and its functional role in relation to the city itself. In this direct relationship between ethos and city in Sparta lies the peculiarity of the Spartan state itself, which is reflected in Sparta's success in maintaining its social cohesion and political stability for almost 4 centuries, from the end of the 7th century to the late 3rd or 2nd century before Christ. In this context, the position of woman is interpreted in the context of the Spartan ethos, and more specifically on the basis of the connection between house and city. Consequently, the theory of the libertarianism of the woman of Sparta, who lived unconcerned and tenderly while at the same time possessing 2 ethos, reflects the criticism of the ancient writers of the indeed different economic and political position of the Spartan woman, which is due to the Spartan system of land ownership as it functioned through the Spartan ethos, a flexible and open system of economic and political operation of the city, which was more related to the characteristics of the Homeric ethos and was known in Sparta from the early archaic period. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your strict presentation and your presentation in time. Now it's the time to listen to the to Professor David Phillips.
There. και το Σπαρτιατικό Κληρονομικό Δίκαιο. Μαζί μας ο καθηγητής David Phillips.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα. Θα ήθελα να εκφράσω τις ευχαριστίες μου στην
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Ms. Kanelopoulou and all of the members of Institute of Sparta for inviting me today and for giving me the chance to be here with you. Κάποια στιγμή μετά το 404, ένας Εύωρος, ο οποίος
in Spartan terms a retra, that permitted a person to give inter vivos or bequeath by will his household and his lot to anyone he wished. This destroyed the previous Lycurgan system, whereby lots had passed from father to son. Decedents' relatives lost their inheritances, wealth became concentrated in the hands of a few, and oliganthropia became so severe that by about 244, no more than 700 Spartiates remained, of whom perhaps 100 had land and lot. Despite the clear concurrences between Plutarch and Aristotle, which I will discuss presently, today, thanks to the work of Eckhart Schuttrumpf, Stephen Hodgkinson, and others, the retra of Epitadius is frequently condemned as a fiction. But it still has its defenders, and in this paper I will add myself to their ranks. I will argue that there is no necessary contradiction between Plutarch and Aristotle, and that Plutarch is right about the retra's content, but wrong about its date. I will then discuss the ramifications of the retra for the Spartan law of gift, bequest, and other transfer of real property, and its role in Spartan oliganthropia. We have only basic information about Spartan inheritance law. Herodotus states that when a man dies leaving a never married and unbetrothed patrouchos, the kings determine whom she shall marry. A patrouchos is the daughter of a man who dies without a surviving son. Aristotle blames Sparta's laws for the concentration of wealth and the resulting oliganthropia. Permitting gift and bequest of land has the same effect as endorsing purchase and sale. About 40% of Spartan land belongs to women because of a large number of epikleroi and size of dowries. Aristotle uses the Athenian term epikleros that approximately corresponds to Herodotus's patrouchos. And when land is divided among multiple sons, impoverishment inevitably results. Between Herodotus and Aristotle, Spartan inheritance law underwent at least one change. The marriage of a patrouchos left unbetrothed by her father was now subject to the total discretion of the father's male heir. Moreover, Aristotle's observations that Spartans could dispose of land by will and division of land resulted in impoverishment shows that in his time, the Spartans practiced partible inheritance of land in some but not all cases. The same principles must have applied a fortiori to non-landed property. A testator could thus devise his estate in its entirety to a single heir or divide it among multiple heirs. This brings us to Plutarch. Plutarch clearly describes the same legal dispensation as Aristotle, unlimited capacity of gift and bequest, with the same results. The concentration of land in the hands of a few, the impoverishment of the rest, and the consequent oliganthropia. But while Plutarch attributes the retra to the Ephor Epitadius and dates it to sometime after 404, Aristotle neither names the lawgiver nor dates the law, apart from observing that its effects were rampant by 371. At one earlier point in this section of Aristotle's Politics, this is Politics 2:9 on the defects of the Spartan constitution, Aristotle mentions Lycurgus by name. but everywhere else he refers simply to the lawgiver, o nomothetis, 10 instances. The law on gift and bequest has no expressed subject. The lawgiver has to be inferred from the laws mentioned earlier in the sentence. Those who reject the retra of Epitadius commonly assert that the lawgiver must be Lycurgus, that Aristotle thus presents the law of gift and bequest as unchanged since Lycurgus, and that Plutarch therefore fell victim to a fallacy. But this argument has a fatal flaw. At least once, Aristotle uses o nomothetis to refer to a lawgiver who cannot be Lycurgus. The nomothetis who created the Ephoret, as we learn later, was King Theopompus. And we can scarcely believe that Aristotle ascribed to Lycurgus the law governing the navarchy, which only became a regular office in the later 5th century. So we need not conclude that Aristotle ascribes the law of gift and bequest to Lycurgus, and such a conclusion becomes even less likely in light of Aristotle's praise of Lycurgus as one of the best lawgivers. In Politics 2:9, Aristotle condemns numerous fundamental defects of the Spartan system. The fewer of these he attributed to Lycurgus, the more justified his positive summary verdict. There is thus no compelling reason to believe that Aristotle ascribed the law on gift and bequest to Lycurgus, and good reason to believe that he did not. While this does not prove that Aristotle assigned the law to Epitadius, it does establish that there is no necessary contradiction between Aristotle and Plutarch. Now, on to the author and date of the retra. Epitadius, says Plutarch, passed his retra during his Ephoret sometime after 404. This is our only evidence for Epitadius, who is the sole attested Spartan with this name. Yet another prominent Spartan, Epitadas, again the only attested Spartan with the name, commanded the final relief force and was killed in action at Sphacteria in 425. This appears to rule out an equation between the two men, for a man killed in 425 cannot be elected ephor and author a law after 404. The chronology, the rarity of the names, and the distinguished positions they held might suggest that Epitadius was a younger relative of Epitadas, whose only known relative is his father, Malobrus, but it is far more likely that the two men are identical and Plutarch erred in his date and in the form of the name. Aristotle, as we saw, attests that the effects of the law were rampant by 371. Especially in deeply conservative Sparta, Epitadius's retra cannot have produced epidemic results in less than 33 years, with an immediate avalanche of Spartan fathers disinheriting their sons in defiance of tradition and strong familial and social pressures. The retra must therefore have been passed before, not after 404. And this in turn supports the equation of Epitadius with Epitadas. If this is the case, Thucydides' version of the name must be correct. Thucydides was a contemporary of the man, and in numerous instances, Plutarch's version of a Spartan name differs from an earlier and more reliable source. Epitadas will then have served as ephor and written his retra before 425, when he assumed the command in which he died. Additional evidence for a date before 425 is provided by Sparta's reactions to Sphacteria. The approximately 120 Spartiates taken alive and the unknown number of Spartiates killed in action so alarmed the Spartans that they sued for peace and complied with Athens' demand that they cease invading Attica. After the prisoners returned in 421, they were punished as thresantes, tremblers, for choosing surrender over death. The Spartans disfranchised them such that they could neither hold office nor buy or sell anything. Thresantes and their female dependents also became personae non gratae for marriage. This decreased the Spartiate reproductive pool and thereby aggravated the very oliganthropia that the prisoner's recovery was supposed to mitigate. And so, sometime before Thucydides' death, Sparta restored the rights of the Tessantes. It is highly unlikely that at any time during this period, the Spartans would have compounded their oliganthropia by permitting the alienation of kleroi to the detriment of sons or other male relatives whose Spartiate status depended on paying monthly fidition dues in the form of agricultural produce. Moreover, subsequent war casualties exacerbated the oliganthropia that Sphacteria had laid bare. And so, with every passing year after 425, the enactment of a retra that would worsen the problem even further becomes less and less likely. Sparta's behavior after Sphacteria and the demographic concerns that motivated it thus provide independent grounds for dating the retra before 425, and this in turn offers further support for equating Epitadius with Epitadas. This identification gives us a terminus post quem for his effort and retra. Ephors had to be at least 30 years old. Military service ceased at the age of 60. Hence, Epitadas, killed in battle in 425, must have been Ephor in or after 455. Assuming that his estrangement from his son occurred when the latter was an adult, aged at least 20, Epitadas must have been at least 40 at the time of his Ephoret and retra. This produces a terminus post quem of 445. Within the resulting range, 445 to 426, probability favors a later date. The gap between Ephoret and command at Sphacteria is likely to be significantly smaller than the maximum, and Plutarch's association of the retra with the Peloponnesian War is unlikely to be a total fabrication. Most probably, therefore, the retra was passed between 435 and 426. While the identification of Epitadius with Epitadas defies conclusive proof, it is far more probable than the alternative, namely that two men with otherwise unattested names so similar that they might be identical both served in prominent positions around the same time. Nonetheless, since they may have been different people, perhaps collateral relatives, I will retain the traditional designation of the law as the retra of Epitadius. So, what exactly were the terms and the legal effects of the retra? At first sight, Aristotle and Plutarch appear to differ. Whereas Aristotle's unnamed lawgiver permitted the gift and bequest of any and all landed property, Plutarch specifies that Epitadius's retra applied to a person's household and lot, the original parcel of land in the vicinity of Sparta that had been passed down in the family line allegedly since the time of Lycurgus. As others have noted, though, there is no contradiction here. For an excerpt from the Aristotelian Constitution of the Lacedaemonians records that Spartan law treated the ancestral lot differently from other real property. The latter could be sold, but the former could not. In the Politics, Aristotle ignores this distinction. The natural implication is that the same applies to gift and bequest. We can thus conclude that Plutarch accurately reports that the retra of Epitadius permitted the gift or bequest of household and lot, while Aristotle describes the resulting state of the law. The right of gift and bequest thenceforth applied to all real property. This means that before the retra, a Spartiate could buy, sell, give, or bequeath any real property except for an ancestral kleros, and after the retra, even this could be given or bequeathed, but it still could not be bought or sold. Plutarch maintains that before the retra, the ancestral kleros had been indivisible, passed down from father to a single, presumably the eldest son. This statement has been attacked on grounds including the lack of provision for additional sons and the supposed ancient Greek norm of partible inheritance. But Plutarch cannot be dismissed so easily. Spartiates owned plenty of land outside their ancestral lots, especially in Messenia, that could also provide fidition contributions. Landed Spartiates must commonly have paid these contributions for their landless relatives and friends. And even if partible inheritance was the Greek norm, other Greeks didn't do it can be a tenuous argument when it comes to Sparta. Other Greeks didn't have the dual kingship or helot slavery or the agoge either. And partible inheritance of the ancestral kleros before the Retra of Epitadius presents its own problems. Especially under Hodkinson's model of diverging devolution and universal inheritance, with all children inheriting from both parents, even if marriage within the broader kin was common, multiple generations of multiple children will have resulted in the partition of any plot of land beyond recognition or reasonable administration. This is exactly the flaw that Aristotle detects. Division of land results in impoverishment. And given that the ancestral kleroi must predate the First Messenian War, when a demand for land redistribution was rejected, I find it very difficult to believe that a regime of partibility survived for over 250 years, collapsing only in the later 5th century when significant oliganthropia is first documented. I therefore accept Plutarch's account of the ancestral kleros as indivisible before Epitadius's Retra. After the Retra, as Aristotle attests, the right of partibility applied to all land. The owner of an ancestral kleros might give or devise it entire, or might divide it among multiple children or any other Spartiates. How did this contribute to Spartan oliganthropia? The essential facts are these. In 480, the total Spartiate combatant population numbered approximately 8,000. Sparta's reactions to Sphacteria, which I discussed earlier, show that significant oliganthropia had set in by 425. 7 years later, the Spartiate combatant population numbered either about 2,500 or about 5,000. In 371, only about 700 Spartiates, out of a total combatant pool of approximately 1,200, fought at Leuctra. About 400 were killed in action, and the survivors were spared punishment as tresantes. Finally, around 244, the total number of adult male Spartiates stood at no more than 700, of whom perhaps 100 possessed land and lot. Aristotle and Plutarch attest that the Retra of Epitadius played a large role in this process. The Retra permitted ancestral kleroi to be given or bequeathed to and among any Spartiates. Its beneficiaries included daughters who received such land as dowry or inheritance, sons other than the previous single heir, and above all, wealthy men and women. Since wealth tends to marry wealth, daughters in possession of significant land will normally have obtained similarly endowed husbands and passed on their combined estates to their children. The wealthy could also now acquire others' ancestral plots under the legal fiction of a gift or bequest disguising a sale or a surrender by a debtor in default. As Aristotle observes, permitting gift and bequest has the same effect as permitting purchase and sale. Of course, the Retra of Epitadius does not tell the whole story. The large number of epikleroi noted by Aristotle resulted not just from family planning designed to prevent the excessive division of estates, but from the deaths of Spartiate sons in war. Another major factor was the loss of Messenia, liberated by the Thebans and their allies in 370-69. This wrought disastrous effects on the Spartans. Spartiates who owned land in Messenia lost it, and the Helots who worked it. They could no longer pass these lands down to their heirs or otherwise dispose of them. Fidition dues now had to be paid from the produce of Laconia alone. and so the already severely depleted Spartiate class suffered further reduction. How might the Spartans have solved their oliganthropia before it was too late? Eventually, in 227, Cleomenes III redistributed the land of Laconia, canceled debts, and enfranchised Periiki and foreign mercenaries. But this was possible only in the wake of a violent coup d'etat. Under normal circumstances, the Spartans' abhorrence of revolution, reinforced by the allegations against Pausanias the regent in the late 470s, the conspiracy of Kynedon circa 399, and above all, the Great Helot Revolt of 465 to 455 would never have permitted such drastic measures. But these were not the only options. Relaxing or eliminating the requirement of paying Fidition dues in order to maintain Spartiate status would have achieved the same goal. Aristotle believed that the Fiditia ought to be financed by the Spartan state, but, as he noted, the treasury was constantly empty. Alternatively, wealthy Spartiates might have been required to pay greater Fidition contributions so that the poor could pay less or nothing, but passing such a measure would have faced formidable obstacles. In any event, rather than enacting these or other permanent measures that might reverse the damage done by the retra of Epitadius and the other causes of oliganthropia, the Spartans held fast to tradition. And so, as Aristotle observed, Sparta was destroyed by oliganthropia. In keeping with a suitably laconic but non-Laconian proverb, Sparta's pride went before its destruction, and its folly preceded its fall. Thank you. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you very much indeed. If what I'm having here is correct, it's time for Professor Rita Sassou to tell us about female owners in Doric polis, some observations on women's property rights in Sparta and Gortyn. So we're going to have both Sparta and Crete for once.
Okay. So, the present paper aims to enucleate common elements in the legislative systems of
σε δύο δωρικές πόλεις, οι οποίες συνδέονταν, η Γόρτυνα και η Σπάρτη, και με μεγάλη συγκεντρωσία στην γυναικεία περιουσία και στις ικανότητες των γυναικών. Οι δύο πόλεις,
text
λοιπόν,
and distinguish them, as have been already said in the previous papers, from other Hellenic centers. Furthermore, the conclusive consideration mean to illustrate the forms of female ownership and management of resources in ancient Sparta. Although the relations between Sparta and Gortyn are complex and hitherto not entirely clear, the attestation of shared phenomena should be carefully examined as a possible indication of processes of derivation, reciprocal contact, and expression of Doric identity. According to one of the several traditions explaining the origin of the city of Gortyn, the Cretan settlement was a colony of Sparta. The narration of the Laconian foundation of Gortyn is attested in the Narratio of the Augustan age mythographer Conon and should be traced back to Ephorus' Universal History. Regardless the authenticity of the hypothesis of a Spartan foundation of Gortyn, including settlers from Amyclae, many common features are detectable in the two polis. Such features concern the domains of topography, religion, society, form of government, economics, and legislation. Both the city's borders seem to be virtually defined by a sort of sacred boundary, poor cartilage says a sacred pomerium, composed by a series of sanctuaries delimiting the extension of the settlement and articulating the relation between the urban core and the surrounding core. Many cults are simultaneously documented in Gortyn and Sparta. This is the case, for instance, of Athena Poliukos, the patron goddess of the respective acropolises of both Gortyn and Sparta, Apollo Pythios, Artemis, Ilicia, Aphrodite, Demeter and Core, and Eulaios. In both the centers, an Amyclaion is attested, and one of the months of the Gortynian calendar is Amyclaios. It has been hypothesized on the basis of some epigraphs dating back to the 7th and 6th century BC from the stairs of the walls of the Temple of Apollo in Gortyn, from the area of Mavropapa and from the Oideion, that the city of Gortyn was originally structured in villages, catacombs, replicating the well-known model of Sparta. Moreover, the two cities show an articulation of the society in classes marked by different levels of access to rights, the homoioi, perioikoi, and ilotes at Sparta, and the eleutoroi, apetaroi, and doulo in Gortyn. And the existence of perioikoi as slaves forced to cultivate the land is documented also in Gortyn, both at the epigraphic and literary level. The stratification of the society, strongly based on military training, foresees in both the city-states, Sparta and Gortyn, a further articulation on classes determined by age and connected to the system of education. In other words, the Spartan agogé is somehow duplicated by the Cretan dromos system of education. Many shared elements can be also observed in the field of the management of the state. Originally, both Sparta and Gortyn were ruled by a monarchy, although this form of government ended up having different fates in the two settlements. The institution of the elders, who remained in office for life, long played an incisive role in the management of the government of both polis, and the Council of the Elders of Gortyn is in fact considered by Aristotle a replication of the Spartan Gerousia. Likewise, the institution of the ephors in Sparta is mirrored by that of Cosmo in Gortyn, and so on. As far as the laws are concerned, ancient authors, remarkably Ephorus and Aristotle, well stressed the specularity between the legislative system of Sparta and that of Gortyn. To them, the affinity between the legal sets of the two polis was an unquestionable fact. The Cretan laws were actually Spartan laws that had in turn been inspired by Cretan lawgivers. Given that, according to their view, certain Cretan cities, such as Gortyn and Litos, being Spartan colonies, were still preserving the Spartan institution intact at their time, namely the 4th century BC. Ancient sources' acknowledgement of the interconnection between the laws of Sparta and the laws of Gortyn goes even further by attributing a decisive influence over Lycurgus to the Cretan Minos, and even placing Lycurgus among the followers of the lawgiver and poet Thaletas from Gortyn. When it comes to female property rights, Sparta and Gortyn show evident areas of convergence and differ from the majority of ancient Hellenic cities, where a great care was put in avoiding the dispersion of the family properties by ensuring male inheritance. As a result, most of the Greek polis opted for restricting female property ownership and in general downgraded women's property rights. The most studied case is Athens, which intervened in both aspects, entirely excluding women from direct inheritance and giving their husbands control of the dowry. In fact, as regards financial rights, the condition of women in Sparta and Gortyn contrasted sharply with that of Athens and other Greek polis, where the legal authority of a male kyrios or guardian was particularly incisive and extended to the sphere of financial resources, till the point that in legal matters women were not capable of performing transactions beyond the value of a medimnos of barley. The most informative document about women's property rights in Gortyn is the famous Great Inscription. Given the fame of the text, also known as the Queen of the Inscriptions, I will not repeat its contents, already known to all of you, but I shall focus only on the context dealing with our subject of interest. As far as Sparta is concerned, there is an heterogeneous, although not enormous, dossier of documents. Many of them have been already mentioned by the previous speakers, both today and yesterday. which help to reconstruct the economic life of Spartan women. Nevertheless, written sources on this subject have to be consulted with caution, considering that, aside from Alkman, most of the literary evidence about Spartan women comes from non-Spartan authors. And non-Spartan authors may have deliberately distorted the picture and, because of their ethnocentric standpoint, may have indulged in the representation of the Spartans as others, different from the civilized Athenians. So non-Spartan sources appear in fact mainly interested in the odd, unusual, and exotic features of the lives of Spartan women, and in some cases portray Sparta as a barbarian society where women live free from normal rules, often dominating their husbands and fathers. Aristotle has already said, implicitly ascribed the decay of Sparta to the immense wealth and power of women, together with their reckless behavior and respectful of civil rules. So, given these precautionary premises on the nature and scopes of some of the literary sources we will rely on, we shall now proceed in our analysis of the property rights of women in Sparta and Gortyn. The first aspect to consider is inheritance law. Unlike most of the other ancient Hellenic counterparts, Spartan and Gortynian women had rights of inheritance, and they were entitled to inherit half a portion of the wealth given to a son. So, under a system of universal female inheritance, Spartan and Gortynian daughters inherited even in the presence of male siblings. Every woman gained some inheritance share from her parents, either receiving half a portion in a division with her brothers, or jointly on equal terms with her sister, or inheriting as the sole heiress in the absence of siblings. In this framework, a special position was held by the orphan female heiress without father or brother, the weakest element of the oikos intended as the basic cell of the society. Coherently, a great portion of the Gortyn Code is devoted to this subject. The female orphan is entitled to inherit her father's estate and to control the inherited patrimony for life, as long as she respected the law specifying who she could marry. On one side, her juridical capacity to retain female properties enables the preservation of the wealth of the oikos. On the other side, it generates interest into her from the sides of relatives and other members of the tribe. And therefore, the Gortyn Code defines the rules for her marriage, specifying those who have the right to wed her in the attempt to safeguard her and her financial patrimony. In the case she married outside the set rules, the kosmoi have to be consulted. A similar scenario applies to Sparta. Herodotus states that under certain circumstances, the marriage of an orphan, unmarried, and unbetrothed heiress came under the jurisdiction of the kings, who allocated her to her appointed male next of kin. But we already discussed it in the previous papers. It's worth noting that Herodotus uses the word patrocus, meaning the one who owns the father estate, and corresponding to the term patroikos of the Code of Gortyn. So we have the same word in both in Sparta and Gortyn. And as already shown, patroikos in Gortyn, insofar as she stuck to the laws specifying whom she was to marry, remained the legal owner of her father's estate throughout her life, unlike the Athenian epikleros, who had to cede the property when her sons came of age. The similarity of terms suggests that the Spartan patroclus enjoyed legal rights of ownership over the patrimony comparable to those of the Gortynian women. So even in this case, there is a specularity between the two cities. Furthermore, in both Sparta and Gortyn, the wife was the owner as well the manager of the dowry. In Gortyn, the dowry was the daughter's pre-mortem share of inheritance. It's not entirely clear whether in Sparta the dowry was an anticipation of the daughter's rightful share of inheritance, or rather a voluntary marriage settlement given to the spouse by her parents, whose consistency was varying and depending on the family possibilities. This second interpretation seems more coherent with the causes of Spartan female great wealth mentioned by authors such as Aristotle and Euripides. This demonstrated that probably the institution of Kyreia, or guardianship, attested in Athens as well as in other polis, was not in force in our two case studies. The existence of a Kyrios managing women's property is never attested in the Gortyn Code, and even if it existed, it was not involved in financial matters. At least in Gortin, women property rights were protected also in the case of divorce or widowhood. The Gortin Code specified that in case of divorce, the woman was entitled to take back her dowry and all the possessions she had before the marriage, together with half of the revenues deriving from her possessions of lands, if any, and half of her textile production. Although some scholars have hypothesized that differently from Sparta, Gortinian women mainly inherited money, cremata, as the Gortin Code specified that they do not inherit houses or livestock, this section of the code actually proves the opposite. Gortinian women could enjoy the revenues of their lands because they owned the lands, exactly as the Spartan women. Hence, female possessions derived from inheritance, dowries, income deriving from landed properties, for instance, in the case of cultivated land that yielded revenues, and the production of manufactured goods, such as woven wool and fabrics. If productive activities in this regard is well attested for Gortin, the traditional assumption that Spartan women did not practice wool working, which was reserved for female helots, has been recently deflated by the discovery of domestic and votive deposits containing weaving equipment and textile-related artifacts from Spartan sanctuaries, such as the one of Artemis Orthia, of Athena over the Acropolis, the Menelaion, and so on. Up to now, we carried out an analysis of the areas of convergence and overlapping between the Spartan and Gortinian legislation regarding female ownership. We shall now conclude our paper by restricting our focus of attention merely on Sparta and its peculiarities. So the following final observation, we shortly explore the consistency of women's possession, the nature of female wealth, and how it was managed and spent, although these subjects have been already touched by the previous speakers. While we have no clues about the actual extent of women's wealth in Gortin, we are informed by the significant consistency of Spartan female properties by authors such as Aristotle and Euripides, although we already stressed how literary sources on Spartan women should be used cum grano salis for the above-mentioned reasons. Aristotle, as has been said many times in this today, stated that 2/5 of all the land of Sparta was possessed by women, and the statement, in addition to stressing the dimension of women's health, provides an insight on the nature of such a wealth. It seems that the majority of the wealth of the Spartan citizens, both male and female, derived from the possession of land, and this apparently contrasts with the traditional view that Lycurgus took landed property into public control and divided it equally among Spartan citizens. But we should assume that the reality was indeed more nuanced, and at least from a certain moment it was different. But this subject has been just discussed in the previous paper. Anyway, although the state maintains certain public rights over private property, such as the compulsory levy upon agricultural products for the common mass use, both men and women still had personal land holdings, with that they could manage in an autonomous way. In fact, as it has been just discussed, it was dishonorable to buy or to sell the lands in someone's possession, but it was it was possible to give away and benefit it. So it was clear that private property, at least from a certain moment, exists, and there was no differentiation here between male and female owners, and properties could be gifted and bequeathed. So Spartan female resources primarily relied on the possession of land, and as observed for Gortin, largely derived from its exploitation. Another piece of evidence on the significant amount of wealth possessed by women comes from Plutarch and reflects the rising profile of women in Hellenistic Sparta, and particularly in the 3rd century BC, a subject that we have already investigated in the conference here organized 2 years ago, and in which I will not therefore indulge. According to the author, Agesistrate and Archidamia, respectively the mother and grandmother of King Agis IV, were actually the richest person in Sparta. Euripides, in his work Andromache, provides additional useful information on the economic situation of Spartan women and their capacity to directly control their possessions. He depicts Hermione as a wealthy Spartan princess who maintained control over the property she received as gifts and dowry from her father Menelaus. Hermione's statement brings about the question of possession and display of gold and luxurious jewels by women, on which regard the ancient sources and also modern scholars are discordant. It's a general belief that Sparta restricted the usage of luxury goods and gold, and Spartan women were not permitted to wear gold and ornaments. But notwithstanding the ban, Euripides Hermione is wearing a costly golden diadem, and Alcman informs us that girls taking part in Spartan choruses were lavishly dressed in purple clothes and golden jewelry. Ascertain that Spartan women possessed properties and had legal rights to directly manage them, we can now draw some observation on how they did spend them, besides on possibly golden jewels. In this regard, archaeological data can integrate the scenario depicted by the written sources. Besides ordinary expenditures, the availability of funds allowed women to bestow expensive dedication, such as buildings and statues and votive offerings made of precious metals in religious sanctuaries. For instance, Spartan women were expending consistent sums on offerings dedicated at the central shrine of the polis, the sanctuary of Athena Poliukos on the Athenian Acropolis, whose archaeological record we have already analyzed in detail in last year's conference. Here, a great amount of costly bronze belts was discovered, and meaningfully, some of the recovered items explicitly mention female names as offerers, as other archaeological items, such as the bronze mirrors over the slide. Similarly, from the sanctuary of Artemis Sortie, a large number of bronze dedication by women was brought to light, and the same is true for the Menelaia, and even in sanctuary outside Sparta, such as Olympia, as we shall see in a while. Women's religious activity was not limited to dedication, but also included a wide range of rites, as it will be illustrated by the next speech by Dr. Galino. As attested by Alcman's poems, Spartan women engaged in choruses and foot races, competitive activities marked by both educational and religious purposes. And according to Plutarch, physical training prepared women both to ensure military protection to their polis if needed, and to improve the process of childbirth and procreation of healthy, strong children. Coherently, Xenophon maintains that Lycurgus established a regimen of physical training for women and also established contests of running and strength for female competitors.
2 more minutes, I'm afraid.
Yes, I'm about to finish. It's exactly in the sport field that once again Spartan women distinguished themselves from the rest of Hellas. The wealth and the possibility to make free use of private resources contributed to the success, for instance, of Kiniska, the sister of King Agesilaos and daughter of Archidamos, to take part in the Olympic Games and to be the first Greek woman to win the Pan-Hellenic competition twice around 390. Kiniska eternalized her Pan-Hellenic triumph with 2 grandiose works of art in the sanctuary of Zeus at Olympia, and it's exactly her immense wealth that enabled her to publicly flaunt her success by the means of expensive works. One monument was erected inside the Altis to the east of the temple of Hera, and consisted of a statuary group made by the sculptor Apelles portraying Kiniska herself, her charioteer, chariot, and horses. And the victorious Spartan woman proudly declared in the inscription incised over the limestone basis of her portrait statue, her success. The other memorial in Olympia consisted of a bronze statuary group of less than life-size horses. The recovery of a small Doric capital and abacus inscribed with Kiniska's name in the Menelaion indicates that, unlike previous Olympic victors, and possibly cause of the greatness of her achievement, she was permitted to celebrate her victory inside Sparta, in front of her fellow citizens, with a small edifice, while previous male victors were prohibited to celebrate inside Sparta the Pan-Hellenic victories. And Kiniskan, President the victory, pushed other women to follow her steps. So, as known, Eurylionis, a Spartan woman, winner of the Olympic two-horse chariot race in 368, even surpassed Kiniska in celebrating her victory, dedicating an expensive self-portrait statue in the sanctuary of Athena on the Acropolis of Sparta. In conclusion, the picture emerging from the analyzed sources confirm a series of correspondences between the legislation of Sparta and the legislation of Gortyn concerning female capacity to inherit, own, and control properties. On the basis of the available data about Sparta, the possibility to possess and manage personal wealth enables Spartan women to attain extraordinary achievements in terms of success, political power, and dedication of monuments and artifacts that find no comparison with the rest of other ancient Greek cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now it's the turn of Dr. Stefania Golino, who will talk about female worshippers in ancient Sparta, heroic cults, and women's engagement in ritual activities. Dr. Golino, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to follow the discussion concerning the Spartan women by focusing on the female worshippers in ancient Sparta and their engagement in ritual activities and heroic cult. The role of women in ancient Sparta presents a fascinating and unique perspective within the broader context of Greek society. Unlike other Greek polis, Spartan women enjoyed significant freedoms and responsibilities that extend well beyond the domestic sphere. Furthermore, Spartan women were crucial participants in the religious life of Sparta and public life of Sparta, engaging actively in heroic cults and various ritual activities. Their participation reflected their importance in maintaining and perpetuating Spartan values and traditions. In a society deeply rooted in militarism and communal values, the involvement of women in religious practices underscores the distinctive nature of Spartan society, where women had more autonomy and influence compared to their counterparts elsewhere in Greece. In this regard, Spartan women's participation in cultural activities, particularly those centered around the heroic cults, was significant in several key rituals and festivals, which included, for instance, the worshipping of Helen, the association with the cult of the Leucipides, the cult of Alexandra Cassandra, the cult of Kiniska, already addressed by the previous speakers, and the Iagintia. As for the cult of Helen, she had held a unique and influential position within the multifaceted pantheon of Spartan heroic cults. Therefore, her cult deserves a special focus in this discussion. Worshipped as both the wife of Menelaus and the sister of the Dioscuri, Helen's cult gained a significant prominence during the archaic and classical periods. Her heroic status was celebrated in several sanctuaries and through various festivals held in her honor, reflecting her importance in Spartan society. One of these key sites of Helen worship was the Menelaion at Therapne, where she was venerated alongside her husband, the Spartan king Menelaus, of course. It is believed that a festival known as the Heleneia was closely connected to this sanctuary. Literary evidence suggests that Helen played an active role in these celebrations. For instance, in Euripides' Helen and Aristophanes' Lysistrata, Helen is depicted leading a chorus of young girls during a local Spartan festival, highlighting her association with youth and the community's collective rights. Therefore, Spartiate's daughters were strongly encouraged in participating in these celebrations, which may have acted as initiation or passage rites. The Heleneia festival was likely a grand celebration of Helen's prominent status. It featured a variety of athletic and musical competitions where women and girls participated in choral dances and hymns dedicated to Helen. These performances were more than mere entertainment. They symbolized the communal unity and the reinforcement of social bonds within the Spartan society. In addition, the poet Theocritus, in his work Epithalamion of Helen, provides a further insight into the worship of Helen by describing two distinct phases of her cult. Indeed, in her youth, Helen was depicted as participating in races with other girls, symbolizing her vitality and connection to adolescence. As she matured and assumed her role as the wife of Menelaus, Helen's worship evolved. Young women would no longer race in her honor, but instead revered her as a marital figure, offering libations under a plane tree. This specific tree, as described by Theocritus, was likely associated with the cult of Helen at the Platanistas, a urban shrine in Sparta already mentioned by Pausanias. This site, rich in religious significance, was located near other important cult places, including, for instance, the tombs of Alcman or the sanctuary of Heracles, which underscored the sacredness of this area. Devotees offered gifts such as flowers, fruits, grains, and other votive items to seek Helen's favor, but the rituals also included animal sacrifices. These offerings were believed to secure her protection and blessings, particularly for women who sought her guidance in matters related to beauty, fertility, and domestic harmony. Scholars have suggested that the cult of Helen may be understood through the two aspects outlined by Theocritus. That means Helen as an adolescent worshipped at the Platanistas, and Helen as the devoted wife revered at the Menelaion. These dual aspects link her to initiation rituals, marriage, and fertility, making her a central figure in the rites of passage of Spartan women. The active participation of Spartan girls and women in Helen's worship is further evidenced by archaeological findings, including jewelry and pottery, perfume orders, which were likely used in rituals and offerings at her sanctuaries. Helen's cult was deeply intertwined with that of her divine brothers, Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri. The celebration honoring these twin deities often included elements of Helen's worship, highlighting the close connection between these figures in the Spartan religious life. Women were integral to these festivals, actively participating in processions, making offerings, and performing choral songs that paid tribute to both Helen and the Dioscuri. Their involvement underscored the essential role women played in maintaining the spiritual and the cultural traditions of Sparta. The close association between Helen and her brothers, who were considered the foremost protectors of Sparta, suggests meaningful parallels that reinforce this interpretation. For instance, the fact that the young girls led by Helen would play in the dromos, a traditional location reserved for the races of the Neoi, the newly initiated young men of Sparta, according to Aristophanes, is particularly significant. This setting implies that the girls emulating Helen were seen as possessing quality alike to those of the Neoi, who were on the point of full integration into the adult social order. These parallels suggest that Helen's influence extended beyond mere worship and into the realm of shaping the virtues and the characteristics valued in Spartan youth. Moreover, women were instrumental in maintaining the sanctuaries dedicated to the Dioscuri, engaging in rituals that honored the divine twins and reinforced the values they represented. That means loyalty, strength, and martial excellence. As for the cult of the Leucippides, who were the wives of the Dioscuri, this symbolized the critical passage from adolescence to adulthood, reflecting the societal importance of this transition in Spartan culture, running parallel to the cult of Helen. Women, particularly young girls known as Parthenoi, served as priestesses in the Leucippides cult, leading various rituals, sacrifices, and processions. These young priestesses were central figures in the religious life of Sparta, embodying ideals of purity, devotions, and readiness to assume adult responsibilities. The dual nature of the Leucippides, representing both the innocence of youth and the responsibilities of marriage, mirrored the expectation placed upon Spartan women. Now we move to Amicles, and in particular to the cult of Cassandra Alexandra. This figure, who was known as Alexandra in Sparta, was deeply embedded in Spartan religious life, where she was revered for her prophetic abilities and tragic fate. Spartan women played a pivotal role in the worship and rituals dedicated to Cassandra. Their active involvement in these religious practices highlighted the significant influence women held within Spartan society, particularly in the religious sphere. Indeed, the women were central to the festivals honoring Cassandra, participating in a range of activities that included the solemn religious rites, public celebrations, and community gatherings. These festivals were not just events of worship, but also served as important social occasions that reinforced the community bonds. The rituals often involved offerings and sacrifices, with animal sacrifices and libations being especially prominent. These acts were believed to have a direct impact on the well-being of the community, seeking Cassandra's protection and favor, particularly in times of crisis. The role of women as priestesses within Cassandra's cult underscored their authority and respect in Spartan religious life. These priestesses were entrusted with the responsibility of conducting rituals and leading worship, making them central figures in guiding the community's spiritual activities. Their involvement went beyond ceremonial duties, reflecting the broader respect and influence granted to women in Spartan religious practices. Choral performances and dances were also key elements of the rituals dedicated to Cassandra, with groups of women and girls performing hymns and songs in her honor, often accompanied by traditional instruments such as lyres and flutes. These performances were not only acts of devotion, but also demonstrated the communal and participatory nature of Spartan worship, where women played a leading role. Some Spartan cults involved also historical personalities, such as in the case of the already mentioned Kiniska. So, to sum up, she was a Spartan princess who broke barriers as the first woman to win twice at the Olympic Games. Therefore, she represents a significant and innovative figure of Spartan religious life. Kiniska's remarkable achievements were more than just personal victories, because they symbolized the exceptional strength and capability of Spartan women, embodying the deep respect and the encouragement for female athleticism that was integral to Spartan culture. According to the account of Pausanias, a sanctuary of Kiniska was established in Sparta in the Platanistas. This sacred space, adorned with statues and inscriptions, served as a focal point for rituals and ceremonies that commemorated her legacy. The sanctuary became a place where admirers could gather to pay tribute to Kiniska's achievement, which stood as enduring symbols of her impact on Spartan society and the role of women within it. The annual festivals held in Kiniska's honor featured athletic competitions, processions, and public festivities. These events were particularly important for women and girls who participated in the athletic contests, showcasing their own physical skills and drawing inspiration from Kiniska's legacy. The festivals were not only a tribute to Kiniska's groundbreaking accomplishments, but also a powerful motivator, encouraging other Spartan women to excel in athletics and contribute to the glory of Sparta. A central highlight of these festivals were the chariot races, of course, conducted in Kiniska's honor to commemorate her historic Olympic victories. These races were much more than mere sporting events. They were vivid expressions of the high regard the Spartan society had for physical strength and skill. A final observation concerns the performances during the Iakintia festival, one of the most important events in Spartan religious life, that indeed honored the deep connection between the mortal hero Iakintos and the god Apollo, capturing the essence of themes like death and rebirth that were central to Spartan spirituality. Women played a crucial role in the various rituals and ceremonies throughout the festival. On the first day, they were deeply involved in the morning rites, where their participation in offerings, lamentations, and sacrifices highlighted their role as the custodians of Spartan traditions and religious practices. The use of a local type of hymn or chant on the second day marked the celebration of Apollo's role in Zakynthos ascension, reflecting a communal shift from grief to joy. As the festival progressed, the entire Spartan population, including women and slaves, would leave the town to gather at the sanctuary for collective worship. Therefore, women were integral to the singing and the musical performances that celebrated Apollo's triumph, emphasizing their participation in the spiritual life of Sparta. They were also involved in the Theusia, or the sacrificial rites that honored Apollo on the second day, showcasing their active engagement in the rituals that reinforced the community's religious cohesion. The Zakynthia festival was deeply symbolic, representing the cyclical nature of life and death, with women at the heart of these transitional rituals. Their participation highlighted the broader cultural and religious belief in Sparta, where the concepts of renewal and continuity were central. Through these ceremonies, women not only fulfilled their societal roles, but also gained a significant opportunity to exert influence and authority within both the sacred and the public domains. Figures like Helen, Cassandra, and Kiniska were revered not just as heroic entities, but as role models and protectors who embodied the virtues that were highly valued in Spartan women. These figures represented resilience, prophetic wisdom, and athletic excellence, qualities that Spartan women were encouraged to emulate in their own lives. Moreover, the festivals and the rituals associated with these figures played a crucial role in strengthening communal ties. By engaging in these practices, Spartan women helped ensure the continuity of traditions and the stability of the social structure, making their role in the spiritual and cultural life of Sparta indispensable. In conclusion, the participation of Spartan women in heroic cults and ritual activities was a fundamental aspect of their society. These women went beyond the traditional role expected of them in ancient Greece, holding significant influence in both religious and public spheres. This involvement granted them a level of autonomy and public presence that was unparalleled in the ancient Greek world, distinguishing them from women in other polis. Their roles in these religious practices were not only a reflection of their societal responsibility, but also a testament to the unique position they held in Spartan society, where they were recognized as essential contributors to the state's stability, culture, and religious life. Thank you.
Many, many thanks to another discipline speaker, but remain within the time limit. Λοιπόν, έχουμε την κυρία Δέσποινα Κούτσαρη. Τώρα, εδώ αυτό που βλέπω, και αυτό έχετε κι εσείς, σας έχει αφιερώσει 40 λεπτά. Είναι αλήθεια αυτό? Θα έχει γίνει λάθος, λοιπόν. Εσείς θα το κάψετε, εντάξει, τη βενζίνη που έχετε. Ας προσπαθήσουμε να είμαστε και λίγο λακωνικοί πάντως, έτσι. Δεν μπορώ να πάω κόντρα σε αυτό που είναι γραμμένο, αλλά την κατανόησή σας λιγάκι.
Present and write, I say that we are all tired of this, and I will make a use of this mistake because because my home located near a really historical place in this area, and it stimulated me to study and do research on Spartan women through a research program of the Ministry of Culture. We found that there were no infants born in Keadas, which proves that Spartan people did not throw infants in Keadas. this is true because I've understood that in case there were uh, bones and evidence right here, okay, I would be positive to hear about the barbaric instincts of Spartans, but please, you can tell us details. The floor is yours. Okay, I will be short, I will be laconic. First of all, I would like to thank Ms. Kanalopoulou, which I deeply respect, because I firmly believe that here in Sparta, where I cannot hear so many topics regarding the cultural aspect of Sparta, but I can see the Institute of Sparta, which is trying to enhance and point out the cultural background of Sparta. Ms. Kanalopoulou, congratulations for me. My topic is the economical position of women in ancient Sparta. The rise of Doric Sparta as a leading power in antiquity was based on a harmonious polity of men and women who applied the principles of equality, austerity, and discipline as established by the legislation known as the Lycurgian legislation handed down to us by Plutarch. It is undeniable that women empowered by the state played a decisive role in the society and glory of Sparta. The wish to her child Itan ή Epitas in ancient Greek highlights a unique model of a brave woman and a unique mother. In this paper, we attempt to present the economic position of women in the complex and peculiar society of Doric Sparta as it was shaped over time from the 9th century before Christ to its decline. In 145 before Christ, the political and financial organization of Sparta in the 9th century before Christ, perhaps even earlier, leads us to a mostly exchange economy model. From Pausanias, we learn that when King Polydorus died in the 8th century before Christ, the widow sold his house and she was paid with oxen. This information reveals to us that the woman was able to manage her household, which, as our research shows, accompanied her throughout her life, while her husband treated her as a hostess. At the same time, in the 9th century, it appears that a system of public control of the land was applied, which was divided into lots, which were held for a life under certain circumstances exclusively by men and cultivated by the helots. A man's connection through the lot with the land of his country was connected with his obligation to defend it bravely to the death, till death. From Plutarch we are informed that the legislator Lycurgus divided the land belonging to the city of Sparta into 9,000 lots and distributed it to a corresponding number of Spartans omi. As a criterion for the size of its lot, the need for frugal living of the individual was taken into consideration. Specifically, each man's lot was of such a size as to yield 70 medimnos of barley for the man. I need to tell that medimnos means 50 kilograms, and to the woman 12, and a similar quantity in liquid products. From the above phrase, we are informed that the woman acquired the right of annuity associated with her husband's lot, which belonged to the state. On the subject of the lots and their size, Polybius states, "What is peculiar in the citizenship of Lacedaemon," they say, "is first the regulation concerning the possession of land, of which no one has a larger share, but all citizens must possess an equal portion of land belonging to the city." This has been questioned because equal means equal production and productivity, which means that a bigger lot may be less productive. According to Plutarch, when a child was born, the father was obliged to present it to the Leschi, where the elders of the 5 tribes examined it, and if it was strong and well raised, they ordered the father to raise it and gave the child one of the 9,000 lots of land. The text mentions when a child was born without distinguishing between male and female. The question therefore arises to whether or not the Thelia were represented in the Leschi. Our view in connection with the eugenics pursued by the state is that the presentation to Leschi had the meaning of the official integration of the healthy newborn into the tribe, regardless of sex, but only, like today's christening, but only for males. There was an obligation of the state to provide a lot. In this case, the question arises whether the principles of equality applied when the family consisted of several male children or only of females, and how their maintenance was dealt with in the latter case. Plutarch, in his later biography of Aegis IV, gives a different picture of the movement of the clerus, stating that since the number of households appointed by Licur was maintained in the transfer of the lots, and the father left his inheritance to the son, to some extent the continuity of this order and equality preserved the city, despite faults in other areas. However, when a powerful man called Epitadeus, who was stubborn and with a violent character, became a Epharos, he quarreled with his son and introduced a law called Ritra that allowed a man to give his household or else ikos during his lifetime to whomever he wished or to dispose of it by will. It follows from the above that when the 9,000 state lots were not sufficient, the system changed. The lot remained within the family and was just transmitted successively from the father to the firstborn son, who acted as an estiopimin, which means lots were privatized. But then from the time of Epharos Epitadeus, that is in 375 before Christ, institutionally now recognized and protected the absolute right of ownership of land by citizens. That is to say, the complete privatization of the lots was now officially brought about, with a kind of restriction as far as the free sale was concerned. In the context of the aforementioned reforms, it seems that the above problem of families lacking male members was also solved by recognizing the woman's right to own land. We believe that the need for women to hold lots was urgently raised during the long First Messenian War in the middle of the 8th century before Christ, due to the long absence of men, which brought about many social problems and rearrangements, with the most important that of Parthenians. We understand that the system of intra-family transmitting of the clerus disturbed the already problematic equality of equals, of the few, of Omi. The only way for a posthumous son to escape the economic exclusion was to marry a patroucho, which means a daughter of a deceased person without male children, or a widow of a Spartan who had no male children. All of the above, of course, had the consequence of limiting the number of births and of some families with many children becoming bankrupt because of the large number of people that they had to support. It seems that the ideal aim of the time was to have only one child, and a male child at that, who would be the continuation of the family. Hence, the belief that women possessed knowledge of how to control pregnancies and the number of children they would raise. The aforementioned created original family practices that brought about the oliganthropia in Sparta. Thus, in contrast to the monogamy of men, the polyandry of women was common, which was an ancestral payment of the Dorians. Polybius mentions in this framework that it was traditional it was traditional, customary among the Lacedaemonians for a woman to have 3 and 4 husbands, sometimes even most of them were brothers, and their children were common. Moreover, according to the great scholar of Greek antiquity Gustav Klotz, the posterity went to settle on estates outside the lots and take a wife for all. Returning to the study of family practices, we find that when a man had children by his wife, he would give her to another man who wished to remain single but have children with her. Thereby, the children acquired more brothers and sisters without increasing the claimants to their own property. Thus, we observe that over the years the principles of equality, austerity, and simplicity and discipline were subordinated to the wealth factor, whose opponent was the law of Lycurgus. We firmly believe that the first official interventions in the legislation of Lycurgus must have taken place in the 6th century before Christ, against the background of the glamour of the lawfulness then created by the tenure of the wise Helon as Ephorus about 550 before Christ. Aristotle informs us that at the end of the classical period, women owned 2 out of 5 of the land as a product of inheritance on the one hand and dowry on the other. Aelianos also states that those who married women without a dowry were exempt from all public duties. So, in comparison to what Lycurgus had established by the 4th century before Christ, the provision of dowry was now the rule and the non-provision the exception to the rule. Here we should mention that according to Sarah Pomeroy, the inheritance regime for Spartans was the same as for Athenians, but the system was more favorable to Spartan women than to Athenians. Athenian women did not inherit at all, but they were granted a dowry equal to about one-sixth of what their brothers received. On the contrary, the Spartan woman received from her father's inheritance half of what her male brothers received. The Spartan woman's right to own land as a result of inheritance or dowry influenced her life as far as her choice of husband was concerned. Studying Herodotus' work, we are informed that the kings were the sole judges of who had the right to marry an unmarried patrouchos if her father had not married her before his death. In Herodotus' text, only the unmarried heiress is mentioned. Thus, we can conclude that only the married woman enjoyed the right of inheritance without restriction. On the inheritance right of the Spartan woman, Aristotle, in the 4th century before Christ, informs us that it is permitted in Sparta for the father to give his only heiress as a wife to whoever he wants, and if he dies without leaving a testament, then the guardian of the only heiress' daughter marries her to whomever he wants. Both the text of Herodotus and Aristotle's coincide as to the existence of a property right of the Spartan woman due to inheritance. The question is whether the king, according to Herodotus, or the appointed commissioner, or else administrator of the inheritance, according to Aristotle, had an absolute right to marry the unmarried heiress to whomever they wished, or whether they were subject to restrictions. We conclude now from the examples of royal marriages that the choice of the future husband had to be made among those who had the right, and such were the close relatives of the patrouchos. According to historical evidence, there was no restriction on marriages between relatives, as is the case today in the name of incest. Thus, in Sparta, marriages between half-siblings of the same sex took place, resulting in the concentration of the parents' property on behalf of their grandchildren. We mention, for example, the marriage of King Alexander II, 560 until 520 before Christ, with the daughter of his sister, whom he loved in the middle of the 6th century before Christ, as said before, who did not bear children, and because of this, Ephori urged him to divorce her. Then he took a step back and he agreed to marry a second wife, by whom he had Cleomenes I. After the birth of Cleomenes, the first wife bore 3 sons, Dorias, Leonidas, and later hero of Thermopyles, and Cleombratos. Also, the marriage imposed by King Leotychides II from 491 till 469 before Christ on his grandson and future king Archidamus II to his aunt Labito. King Cleomenes I married his only daughter and heiress Gorgo to his half-brother Leonidas I, thus exhausting his royal right to choose between his closest relatives. I will say a comment. Some of them interpret this marriage as the will of Leonidas to make money. According to Plutarch, King Leonidas II of the Ecos of Aiades, who brought no Spartan agogy, as he had grown up in satrapic administrations, forced the widow of Agis IV, Agiatida, of the Ecos of Euripodes, whom he had killed, to marry his son Cleomenes of the Ecos of Aiades, violating both the line of the royal Ecos and the fact that his son was not yet in an age for marriage, which was the 20 years. However, he did not want to give his eldest Aiates to anyone else, because she was heir to her father's large estate. Aristotle gives us the information that in Sparta the sale or purchase of existing property was forbidden, which indicates a certain respect for the institution, but this had disappeared in cases of transfer by gift or bequest. Similar to Aristotle, Heraclitus Limnos makes a similar reference to the act of selling land in Sparta. It is considered shameful by the Lacedaemonians to sell land. However, except for Aegeus land, we can also find the general idea of how movable property and the woman's property moved, since there is no specific evidence. In Sparta, the iron of Taygetus was widely used as a movable medium of exchange, and was given various shapes, which were specially treated with vinegar so that they could not be used again. Many details were given over this coin currency. According to Xenophon, the possession of gold and silver was forbidden, and if someone was found to possess it, he was punished. And while the Spartans were forbidden to possess gold and silver coins, we conclude that the kings and the common treasury of Sparta, which had been created in the meantime because of their licenses, possessed and disposed of them for the needs of foreign missions and war obligations. Athenos, in his work Dipnos Sophistes, informs us, although among the Laconians, as recorded by Poseidon, custom, as we already know, laws were not written in Sparta. It was forbidden for them to import or acquire silver or gold. Nevertheless, they acquired them. By sending part of the spoil of his conquest to Sparta in 407 before Christ, they only accepted for public use, but he was the creator of many evils. The first such evil was the case of Gilpos, the liberator of Syracuse, who gave in to the temptation of money. He considered himself as if the spoils were his own, deposited at Delphi a talent of silver, 11 staters, and 52 mnas, with the order to build the well-known monument of Navarchus. Diodorus Sikeliotis comments that after 400 years of compliance with the laws of Lycurgus, the Lacedaemonians began to relax their institution. when they became so corrupt as to use coinage and accumulate wealth, they lost their leadership. The oracle of the Delphi's oracle, Philomena Spartan, no more, no less, has been fulfilled. The effects of these economic developments as far as women were concerned resulted in the concentration of a large part of wealth, both real and movable, in the hands of Spartan women. Aristotle comments, they live without moderation and they enjoy every luxury. In such a state, wealth is inevitably highly valued when men are dominated by women, and this is a common condition in militarily and warlike tribes. Hence this condition prevailed among the Laconians. Here Aristotle, in a rant of unfavorable criticism of the Spartan state because of the freedom he recognized in women, tries to attribute to them a large share of Sparta's economic and social decline in an attempt to create a basis for his opposition to the freedom enjoyed by the women of Sparta. The great possession of wealth in the 4th century before Christ, which was now a determining factor of social status and distinction, we believe that it involved a small number of women who were part of the successive plutocracy. But the facts prove that some great women of Sparta remained until the last moments of its independence, 145 before Christ, the guardians of the principles whose long-term application had formed an indelible experiential consciousness of values, confirmed by the behavior of Agisistrata, Archidamia, Cratisiclia, and so many others whose names have not been preserved in history. In the middle of the 3rd century before Christ, Sparta for the first time issued its own coinage of wide circulation. We have discussed this topic in detail. By that time, the features that define the society of Omi had disappeared, and the fate of the people was guided by a plutocratic class of men and women, which was opposed to an ancient signal to the reform changes attempted from 244 onwards by kings Agis and Cleomenes III. We recall that for the reform program of Agis IV, his mother Agisistrati and his grandmother Archidamia, two of the richest Spartan women, gave all of their property and eventually their lives as well, expecting to revive the greatness of Sparta. Then, by the side of Cleomenes III stood his heroic mother, the wealthy Cratisiclia, who donated her large fortune to her son's reform program. When necessary, she went to Egypt, to the palace of Ptolemaios III, together with his children, as a guarantee in order to grant aid to Cleomenes for the good of Sparta. After Cleomenes' death and his mother's death, the page of the rich woman of Sparta is now closed. Then many Spartan women were forced into marriages in order to bring legitimization of the subversions, especially economic ones, that he imposed. To cut a long story short, we briefly mentioned that during the initial application of the Lycurgian legislation, which dates back to around the 9th century before Christ, women had no property right, but only a right to the annuity of her husband's cleros. The lots were administered exclusively by the state, which transferred them to the male children, and after their death they were returned to the state. Over the years, the transfer of the lots took place within the family from the father to the firstborn male child, who acted as the estiopimen. The need to regulate cases of the absence of a male child in the family or his death in the war led informally at first to the recognition of land ownership rights for women as well. In the 4th century before Christ, With the close of Epitadeas, the Spartan woman's right to land ownership was fully legalized by dowry or inheritance. The acquisition of land ownership resulted in the concentration of great wealth in women, which affected lives in numerous ways, both in terms of their choice of husband and their ability to influence political developments. In moments of great need, Spartan women confirming their role as guardians of the values of their homeland, disposed parts of their great wealth for the homeland's good. Thank you very much. Perfect. We managed, after so many challenges, to be just on time. Yeah, this is what I'm saying. This means that we have time for some questions before I come to a conclusion. Are there any questions from the audience?
I only have a question to Ms. Kuchari. Apart from what other speakers have told, for all this dispute that all the Spartans had, is it also the fact that they have been obliged, because of the laws, to dismantle the eugenics? Is it also the fact that there were not a lot of men? If there were not any male that were sufficient enough to cope with, is it also a factor to blame? I couldn't hear really good from the microphone, but as extendingly has been said, the fact that there were not a lot of people in Sparta has been caused to a lot of factors that led to the financial situation of the state of Sparta, that over time dissolved the habits. But what you've said concerning the blood mix has been considered from a lot of scholars that didn't have good feelings towards Sparta. So, and this is why they have referred to Kiadas to verse their child inside it. Based on the investigation that has been conducted by the Ministry of Culture in cooperation with War Museum of Athens. I don't know if I have covered your question. Please. But I also want to hear, I only have a question that I want to hear an explanation to Mrs. Anagnostou. The existence of possession of wealth from women that you have referred to is not different from what the Lycurian law has said. Can we designate a relation between this, a relation between the less population? Aristotle in Ηθικά Nicomachia, in one of his work, we know that the Xenophonian and Aristotelian house for man and the distribution of the houses, he does not only speak about the Spartan woman, but he also speaks about their property in Ithaka. And I also want Mrs. Kutsari, but specifically, this question is emphatically if Spartan woman was against the regulation of Lycurgus, because Lycurgus, that is what he taught us. He taught us. Thank you very much. And this is also a question for Mrs. Sassou. I don't know if you can hear. Thank you very much for the questions, actually. The thing of possession of wealth by Spartan women as well as from men is a fact, as I have shown. The possession of women, leave the man. Because you referred the abstract of the same in the same work of Plutarchus. When Plutarchus speaks about the distribution of land, he speaks about Spartans and in the way that the distribution is made both to women and to men in the abstract. He says that a piece of land that is designated to men and the same one that is designated for women, this part will be given in medimnos, in the specific coin that has been given. So where do we see the thing that I have said is against the law of Lycurgus based on what Plutarchus says? Aristotle's refers, because you referred, first of all, I want to clarify that women had a right to have property from the moment that is, okay, from the moment that we have a property law in Sparta, it has to do for both sexes, and this correlates. That was, I wanted to say in my paper, from the need of Spartan city to incorporate the women in the law, in the city. The possession of land also means to have a role as a citizen. So this is why we also educate women and they are part of agoghi. The possession of land did not came after that. It was on the same time. Of course, this is what I'm saying. What was Lycurian laws? If we really pay attention to the abstract, this is not something that it's only said by me. It is generally said in the international bibliography. I only speak as a specialized concerning the ancient Sparta. So this is clarified, we can see it really detailed based on the references. So as far as Aristotle is concerned, we speak about the 4th century before Christ with all these problems that have been proven this time. So really it is depicted in Aristotle's work that women had a lot of GDP. So it provokes a reaction of the Athenians, and it is an effort of Aristotle to find a solution to interpret what you said, the low percentage of people, the fact that Sparta didn't go that good. You referred to for the Spartan education. Is it true or is it a legend that women and men used to swim naked in Evrotas? So this is something has to do with several depictions that has been shown from modern scholars, all these approaches. It is depicted in the references. It is depicted that this thing used to happen, but this is not what we ask for. It has to do with the political approach and the participation of both sexes of the corpus to be part of the Spartan education. We only want to see if there is someone else to ask a question. Mrs. Kanelopoulou? It provokes great impression that in classic antiquity and during the evolution of Sparta, the state itself tried with its way to encourage the participation of women in public work, in public things, not in the military. But it's also impressioning that after a thousand years, we see women to ask for its right to participate in public and also to ask for a vote that she didn't have until the 20th century in some regions. Do you think what people think that Spartan woman was the start of feminism? Because as we read from your papers, that it was not Spartan woman that asked, Kiniska asked for her participation, but the participation in public, it was not a kind of asking, it was the regulation that gave the right, that urged her to participate for the reasons, as you very nice, and they have been really nice analyzed. And how I also need a comment from the ancient Athens and Sparta until the 20th century to demand for her rights. Thank you very much for the question and for the comment. What it needs to be clarified that the Spartan society was really progressive in relation with other states of the antiquity, and this has been depicted from other scholars, from all the references, that is not about Spartan. This reaction, this thing towards from another approach, this is the fact, actually differs, as we really see the Spartan position, the women position in Sparta, but the feminism is something that we see in modern years. It is something like attention. The position of women in other cities has no relation. Woman was really below from what we see in Sparta. For all the reasons that you have said, it was not her achievement, but it was the same state that wanted to shape this frame. So the feminism thing that you referred to is something modern, in modern years. This is something that we can see, and yes, we can refer it, we can say it. It was a start from this region, but we cannot refer it on that region, on that age, on that era. Can we speak about the 4th century before Christ? Yes, this is something food for thought. It's very important, very interesting for the following historic years and for all the comparisons that can be made. It can be studied for the following years. So now Mr. Michalopoulos is going to ask a question. If I have well understood, you claim that oliganthropy in Sparta was a result mainly of Epitatheus' Ritra. Sparta.
Rita, or it was just, or it just accelerated a phenomenon that was in process for centuries.
Thank you for the question. I don't think that the retro of Epitatheus was the main cause. I think it was one of multiple causes. I find much to agree with in the position that the ultimate root of Spartan oliganthropia was the major earthquake of 465. I think that's when it starts. And from that point on, there is a combination of biological and economic factors. And the retro of Epitatheus was one of the major factors, but far from the only one. The numerous Spartiate deaths in war, among many other things.
Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ. Μία ερώτηση προς την κυρία Σασού αλλά και προς την κυρία Μίτση Αναγνώστου. Είναι μια σύντομη αλλά προκλητική ερώτηση. Στην εποχή μας, δηλαδή στον σύγχρονο πολιτισμό, παρατηρείτε ότι η απόκτηση οικονομικών ερεσμάτων και οικονομικής ισχύως
of economic wealth can also be accompanied with political wealth. Why can we see something same in Sparta? Why this emancipation in political and the political emancipation did not lead to an innovation that we also see in modern Greece? Can I respond? As I said, making my paper really dense, I also said that the economic status of women is also related with her political influence. First of all, the fact that, as we said, through kleros, she could be inherited land, which means that she reinforced the political position status from her house with her husband. The political influence that she had in the way she could help the members of the political house, oikos, to participate in appella and mainly to have access and more possibilities to ask for better positions in the society. The question is why she didn't have any political rights. Something like that was not a goal of the Spartan society. It was not to incorporate the women of Sparta to participate in appella and to take decisions, because this thing, as we can see in a slide, the criteria, the Spartan character also had to do with other responsibilities. The responsibility of the citizen had to do with the military, with the services of the Spartan citizen as a warrior. All this matters a lot because it has to do with the defense of the city as a whole, in phalanx, to participate in phalanx, and the society recognize his position to defend the city, apart from the economic responsibilities. So this was not the destiny of the women. As far as the education of the Spartan women, she did participate in the education. What was the Spartan education? So in order to say it very simply in Lacedaemonian, it is the art of living as a citizen. The military education, something else, it's something different, that it is incorporated in this thing and has to do with men whose destiny was to give their services in the military. So those two things are different things. Women didn't have any political rights in Sparta. However, her position was very, very high as far as the politics is concerned. So, as we already said, Spartan society was really progressive in the whole Hellenic world. So there's no comparison with modern era in Greece and internationally. Έχουν πει συνάδελφοι, αλλά ακόμα υπάρχουν με μεγάλη ανεξαρτησία για τις γυναίκες σε άλλα μέρη της κοινωνίας.
Position.
Και εδώ βλέπουμε την
But
οικονομική
still,
θέση.
we should keep in mind that they had wealth, they could manage these financial resources, but still they were not in the same economic position of men. They could inherit but half of the portion of the men. They could inherit the whole estate in the case they were like an orphan heiress without a brother, but only if she married certain specific persons. So even in the economic situation, they were in a better situation than other Greek women, but still not in the same position as the Spartan men. So they were more independent than other women in Greece, but still there was not even from an economic standpoint a whole equality with men, and this is also reflected in the political law situation that still in some centuries became stronger and stronger. The last year we dealt with, no, maybe 2 years ago, we dealt with Hellenistic Sparta, and we had several cases of women that really had a political influence, especially women from royal houses that can have an impact on the political scenario. But this is in the Hellenistic period.
Άρα, είμαστε σχεδόν, είναι και 19. Αν είναι γρήγορο, εντάξει.
Yes, we only have time for a last question. Σας ευχαριστώ. Καθηγήτρια Γκολίνο, μιλήσαμε για την Ελένη, τη γυναίκα του Μενελάου στην
We have ceremonies about her, but we have so many different periods. That's a different age, right? And did they have the same rights, women, during the periods of Menelaus and the Achaean period? Or are they projected to have had the same rights? How are they worse? Is there a continuity of the Spartans from that period? Or there is a break in between with the Dorian tribes, etc.? Thanks.
Okay, the answer is no, there is not an answer, or better. Archaeological evidences suggest that there is a continuity in the cult starting from the end of the 8th century BC up until the Hellenistic period. Again, is not the topic of this panel, but the Hellenistic period saw an higher influence of the women, not only from a political or economic point of view, but also in the religion, because in the area of the heroic cults, for instance, also the heroines had a major role in respect to their partners. I refer to Helen, but I refer also to Alexandra Cassandra. So yes, there is a continuity in the case of Helen of cult from the 8th century BC up until the Hellenistic period. And while time passing, also the role of women evolved, and they gained a major role also not only from the religious point of view, but also in the real society, Spartan society. So it was all connected, of course, but the archaeological evidences suggest that, yeah, there is a continuity.
Τέλεια. Οπότε λοιπόν τελείωσε και το μακροσκελέστερο πάνελ που είχε στην καριέρα μου. Ευχαριστώ.
Longest conference has ended. Thank you very much. Let's go.
Of the conference, please be seated. We'll be having a small panel with Professor Sassou, Mr. Phillips, and Mr. Gramenos with the conclusions of the conference. Please be seated. And the previous panel may be leaving. Rita Sassou stays, and we ask
Of the conference, right? Thanks.
that the international conference reached its 4th edition, and I believe that it was really a great opportunity to deal with many subjects that help us to reconstruct the history of ancient Sparta. We had the chance to deal with big topics such as Spartan eugenetics, Spartan mirage, but above all about specific subjects connected to ancient Spartan economy and ancient Spartan laws. So it was, I believe it really helped to achieve an advancement of knowledge in the field of the reconstruction of the ancient economic model of Sparta, the way of exchanges in a pre-monetary system, and the gradual monetization of ancient Sparta. We had the chance to deal with Spartan laws and inheritance law specifically, and the role of women. I'm extremely glad that the cooperation between the University of Rome and the Institute of Sparta is becoming stronger and stronger, with conferences, educational initiatives, publications, and also the proceeding of these conferences will be published in our joint journal, the Historical Review of Sparta. Now we are under the process of publishing the 3rd issue referring to the last year conference, but also the proceedings of this conference are going to be published as well. So you will receive an email asking for the paper to be transmitted. I would really like to thank all the speakers, the scholars, the professors, the researchers, the authors of books that were gathered here together from Greece, Italy, United States. I mean, it's really a worldwide event, we can say. The audience, the public for their patience, the translators as well. And as we were speaking in the last session about Spartan women in the ancient world, I really believe that we should thank one modern Spartan woman, Mrs. Anastasia Canellopoulos, who is really the beating heart and the soul of all these initiatives, and she really pushes she stimulates all of us to continue to study Sparta, to make researches on it, and to valorize it. So we conclude again with a Spartan woman. This is what I wanted to say. So.
Thank you. I'd like to also, like Rita, I would like to thank Anastasia Canellopoulos again, all the members of the Institute of Sparta, Professor Sassu, and all the other representatives of the Sapienza University of Rome. I'd like to thank all my fellow conference speakers for teaching me so much about the Spartan economy and Spartan currency and Spartan inheritance law. We've had some incredible papers and some incredible conversations here. Thanks not only to the speakers, but to you in the audience. Thank you all very much. It's very gratifying to see so many people gathered in one place who care about ancient Sparta. This is a particular treat for me as an American. I'm not sure I've ever seen as many people in a single room at one time who are as deeply interested in ancient Sparta as you are. So thank you all very, very much. And that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm going to be even more laconic than Professor Sassu. Thank you all again very much.
Λοιπόν, εγώ για να κάνω τη διαφορά θα μιλήσω στα ελληνικά αυτή τη φορά.
In conclusion, I would like to complete listening to every speech, either we speak about the currency or the economic model, or whether we talk about the role that different societal groups play regarding production and this gradual development. I would like to keep two pillars, two themes. One is the relation of economy with society, and the other one is the relation of economy with politics. And of course, they're interconnected as the one supported each other in a way as that the legislator succeeded at, whoever he was. Maybe he was a myth, more of an inspiration in a degree for the rest, but this lawgiver saw that the Lacedaemonian special identity had to face challenges either of the close or further environment, and those challenges were faced through the respect for the common good, the common audience for is in the Hellenistic era, but the audience as a reason. Now see in different times throughout the cultural continuity of the world in the Common Empire, even more, it takes up, it forms the theme of community forms in the Ottoman times, and we see that this Greekness, that the more the Greekness, the Hellenicity subsidize. I would like to say that in a more philosophical view, from the side of political philosophy, if you like to say it like this, it is confirmed through everything that was discussed here today, the perspective of a great philosopher, of Cornelius Castoriadis, who spoke about the self-regulation. I don't know how you interpret it. The self-institution of society. Because I can see that is an open subject to discussion, that Sparta, yes, of course, is a sui generis case throughout times, Greek times. However, its relation with the Greek polis is very connected, very dense. It's a product of this procedure of the creation of the Greek polis. Of course, it was self-institutionalized. However, it's the guarantor of the individuality. And summing up, I would say that what signifies this town, this polis, is the starting point of the modern dialogue that we in the Western world need to make in unified Europe, in the US, in this region, and whoever wants to enter it today or in the future, depending on circumstances, that the time has come to leave individuality and come to the citizen being. There are many ways. Theology, of course. Christian theology is a way towards philosophy. The being means a lot of being, and this is very interesting in order to have an introspective to democracy. Not to be in just numbers, but a realization of common goals and visions. And of course, I wouldn't sum up, and I would like to thank the heart of the conference, Mrs. Kanelopoulou. I wish her a lot of strength and more inspiration to whatever she does, and I would like to thank you from my side for the honor to join you today. The president of I would consider that it's a hyperbole to be considered the heart of the conference, because if the speakers weren't here today, we wouldn't have a conference. Therefore, the organization committee might be an important part, important part because it realizes and brings us all together in the subject that concerns us the more as an Institute of Sparta. But I could consider that the heart of the conference, in essence, is the people that have contributed their life and their scientific research of their studies and of their conversations for Sparta. Because they are these people that open every single time, from the time that we have started to speak more widely about Sparta, they open new fields of discussion and new demands to expand, to say more things next years. And I think this for Sparta doesn't end very quickly. And therefore, here we will see you next time in 2025. That will have the subject that its subject is going to be is already be funded by the Ministry of Culture, and its subject of 2025 would be educational system that creates the Spartan profile, because every single educational system forms a personality, forms a citizen, forms an active participant, an active person or institution. Thus, it would be an exceptional year for our effort, and I firmly believe that everybody would be here today to discuss with this excellency and scientific in detail. I would like to thank one more time the dear friend Mr. Daniel Chiarello, who came from the States for this reason. Accompanied by his wife Lisa, yes, with whom we have already composed the organizing committee, especially Mr. Chiarello. He has made the first steps in order slowly to start the organization of the conference of 2026, which is going to titled Why for Sparta? Why Sparta of New Jersey, that is the town of Mr. Chiarello, was named Sparta, and the other 25 cities and areas that are in the United States, why they had the name Sparta, and why heads of universities have created with the name of Spartan Studies, whether from institutions such as Niarchos Foundation or Leventis Foundation and other more, and why around the world we have so many sports federations that have the name Sparta, and why around the world we have so many businesses that have their name in their name Sparta. We need to have the credit and give an answer to this question. There are many facets. We have heard many interesting things yesterday as well as today for around this subject, but I believe that when we will be able, in the framework for the celebrating the 250 years of American independence, from this side of Sparta, New Jersey, with this activity that will participate in this conference, I believe we will showcase with a very sounding way, in ringing tones, the principles that made Sparta a timeless value, that gave Sparta a timeless value. And even today in this conference, we discussed currency and economy. We discussed about a life model and societal organization that can face challenges that come up today, such as poverty, abuse of power, that the subject that make people poor and unhappy. In a society that flourishes and has the opportunity to feed people with justice for all. So therefore, we look forward to big conferences, and tomorrow we'll be able to organize the next one. I would like to admit that the people of the Institute for this specific conference worked for 8 months. It was a tireless job that required a lot of organizing, and of course our greatest problem, at least in the beginning, was to find the people that will be our speakers. Thankfully, we have a lot of friends, recognized and valued scientists that were able to orient us and helped us to choose all these incredible personalities that contributed today with their very lovely speeches. And I would like to thank them from my heart. I would like, summing up, to say the following. There is a great responsibility from the side of modern Spartans that we have a great wealth in our hands. Intellectual, archaeological, cultural wealth, social wealth, great values that in my opinion we haven't utilized them or recognized them as our modern Spartans in the degree that we are obliged to, especially when an international community recognizes them with such intense degree and a passion as well. Therefore, you see that our duty as modern Spartans is to overcome situations that are connected with behaviors of disregard to this legacy, and try our best to to encourage people so that Sparta can continue and in times of greatness, not of ancient glories, but of equity and equality that needs to have before the modern society in other states, before challenges and investments that unfortunately we don't have them in our town today. I would like to show you this book. We're very grateful because Miss Rita Sasu and Sapienza University are the great funding institutions and people that publish the minutes of this conference. Professor Sasu, this year we published the minutes of 2023, and we look for of 2022, and this conference will be published next year, and we will have it will be available online as well and in paper. It's the only historic scientific journal for Sparta, and this is a result of this cooperation that we had with our conferences, and of course with the initiative of Institute of Sparta. Allow me to thank our great ladies of the Ionian universities, our interpreters and translators. Despite the fact that still haven't been on the market yet, have almost finished their studies. This is an experience that they wholeheartedly gave everything they had and all their love so we can accomplish a great result for this conference. If we had some issues, I believe that we can wholeheartedly understand them, and of course we can understand the great value when conferences are connected with practical of new scientists and of universities. Let's forgive some mistakes in interpreting, and let's look further in the great result. Thank you very much, and we all wish you progress in your life. Summing up, I would like to thank everybody, and we hope to see you again in 2025, unless we see you earlier. Thank you very much.